Hello and welcome to this video on Prion Disease. This is something you may know as mad cow disease, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or creutzfeldt-jakob disease. There are also various other names it's given. Prion diseases are typified by progressive neurodegenerative effects. These disorders affect both humans and animals. Fortunately, they are a very rare family of diseases. The rarity of prion diseases both make them very interesting, but also very hard to study. This is compounded by the fact that we are talking about proteins. Proteins are small and often hard to study. Understanding their structure can be quite straightforward, but what they do and the various intricacies of the different charges and positions of the amino acids that make them up basically means it's very hard to know what a protein is doing at different times and in different locations. Prion diseases occur when a normal protein, called a prion protein, becomes a dysfunctional version of that protein. Unfortunately, prion proteins are found on the surface of many different cells. When prion proteins become abnormal, they begin to clump together, and in the brain, this is especially bad. This is somewhat similar to the neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease that also involve protein bundles. These interfere with the brain's function and other parts of the central nervous system, thereby leading to, ultimately, fatal outcomes. There are three main ways for a prion disease to occur. The most common is acquired, and unfortunately acquired can occur a few ways. The most common is through contaminated food. That is, meat or other protein-rich products that have the dysfunctional prion protein in them. The second is through medical equipment. Generally speaking, we're talking about things that have not been properly sterilized and sanitized, or single-use products that are being reused. The third, which fits into the acquired category, but is slightly different to medical equipment, is medical consumables, like blood. Blood transfers are a big issue because they can carry the prion disease in them and spread very quickly and very effectively. The second is inherited, that is, mutations within the gene responsible for the prion protein. These are generally always inherited, although they can also feed into the final group, which is sporadic. This can either be a mutation that occurs unexpectedly and is not inherited, or it can be because a prion protein misfolds, and this can occur for no known reason. These three mechanisms of developing prion disease are pretty much everything we know about its spread. The theories about prion disease are even less well established. What we do know is that the protein that prions are made up of is found right throughout the body in many different cells, both humans and animals. The problem is that this same protein becomes an infectious material, and, to be honest, it's resistant to proteases that would break it down, so that means you have no way, at least in your body, of stopping it once it starts becoming infectious. The first theory as to how this happens is that they begin to replicate by one mutated prion protein, which causes disease, coming in contact with another prion protein, which is normal. And as they come into contact, they become a heterodimer, and that means the two mimic each other, with the pathological or prion disease version being dominant, and it converts the otherwise normal prion protein into something that's going to cause harm. A second theory is that there are fibrils. These are small strands of protein that bind to otherwise normal prion protein, and this in turn causes the normal prion protein to become pathological. The problem with both of these is that they don't exactly fit the known pattern of development of prion diseases. For example, with the heterodimer version, you would assume that there'd be a constant increase in size and that one would lead to conversion of the other, but that's not always seen. Similarly, with the fibril-based theory, you would expect to see exponential growth, but this doesn't happen either. This leads to a lot of uncertainty and unknowns about prion disease. We know that they occur in the central nervous system and primarily the brain, where they cause the most harm. This leads to symptoms that we do know about. Things like cognitive problems, huge personality changes, confusion, spasms, trouble sleeping, speech issues, and even blindness. As you can imagine, with something like this, treatment would be very important, but there's no cure for prion disease. It is a one-way process that ends with only one thing: death. There are some medications used to try and help with symptoms and relieving other effects, but ultimately these are only going to be a band-aid on a bullet wound and will not necessarily slow down the spread of the disease, nor will it stop it, but it will at least provide things like pain relief, antidepressants for the obvious psychological symptoms, physical assistance, something to provide easing of the muscles which would spasm. Ultimately though, the only things that can be done towards the end are to provide IV fluids and a feeding tube. This will inevitably lead to someone's death, and it will be slow and painful. Just considering that there's no treatment, it is somewhat readily transmissible if you are exposed to contaminated protein. You can see why trying to control the movement would be really important, and many different countries have taken extreme measures to stop this. For example, recently, China stopped all British beef import once a single cow was detected with the bovine version of this. That's because beef from the UK might well have been contaminated with this. The primary ways to stop its spread are fundamentally things like setting very strict import agreements, standards, and more for cattle where bovine versions of these sorts of diseases occur, prohibiting certain parts of animals, particularly cows, from being used for human foods or animal foods. This is one of the reasons why the UK has a big issue with this. You often find that if you are from the UK and you travel internationally, you may not be able to donate blood, and that's because there is a history of the UK having mad cow disease, which has spread to humans, and this can wind up being found in the blood or tissues of people who are otherwise healthy. As a result, they're not able to donate organs, nor are they able to donate blood. There's obviously the always reliable sterilization measures for medical equipment, proper testing of supplies and whatnot, but even that's not always going to be perfect. There's also the destruction of disposable medical instruments, which is the preferred option, even if it is more wasteful. Unfortunately, if you fall into the categories of either having inherited or developed sporadic prion disease, you are shit out of luck. There is nothing to be done about that, other than the aforementioned symptom management. What we do know about prion disease for certain is that it is nearly always fatal. That it's spread by consumption of protein and particularly meat that has been contaminated with it already. This is one of the reasons why certain cannibal groups have a much higher incidence of it. Why, when British farming industry was feeding waste byproducts of the abattoir industry back to things like cattle, they develop prion disease. There are a lot of ways it can develop and become entrenched, and it's very hard to get rid of once it's there, for all the reasons we've mentioned: lack of treatment, fatality, and the fact that in some cases there is no obvious symptom that someone has it until it starts to show itself. This is why prion diseases are so interesting. There's something, protein, that we seemingly know a lot about, but at the same time is incredibly hard to study and understand given what it is and how it functions within the human body, let alone other creatures. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.